I was like, where's he going? Where are we
So,
going?
Pastor Bishop Kevin Wallace,
Okay, let's do it
you
again.
got the Vols shirt on. I mean, you're sporting the home team. People that don't like the Vols hate that shade of orange. Why is that?
So the sheep and the goats. That's essentially what this is about.
Right.
Sheep are orange people. And if you're anti-orange, you're a goat. And there are goat nations and there are goat people. And I'm a sheep. And I feel like Galatians teaches us Jesus was a volunteer. He came and volunteered everything, gave his life for all of us. Something about volunteers that just resonate with the kingdom. And so I'm a volunteer.
Let's talk. Well, let's segue from being a volunteer into reaching the lost and the unchurched. And, recently, and I haven't even had a chance to tell you this, a great leader in our church, someone that's been with you a long time, you recently preached a message on evangelism. It was a very different message. It was very much about, you basically said this, how you win the world when you can't talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
And I know that's passion. It's something you've been preaching a lot on lately. It's something that's been on your heart lately. And this trustee, one of our trustees actually came to me and said, it's the best message you'd ever heard you preach.
Wow.
Now, this gentleman's been with you almost 2 decades.
Wow.
And it was a powerful word. I think you had an anointing at such a time as this. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Even our worship leader said at one point in time yesterday, the world's very loud right now.
Yeah.
The world's getting very loud.
True.
And how are we combating that? With the love of Jesus, doing it with love.
Right.
But how are you reaching the lost? How are you preaching to those that you want to come to your church that may feel like church is not for them?
Yeah. That message, I actually think we put a whole lot of emphasis on getting people to church so they can get evangelized. And I'm not at all against people coming to church to get saved, right? Invite people, get it. But I really think we have disregarded to our own detriment the power of our own testimony. And I said it yesterday in all the locations. We want conversions without having conversations. And I think God wants to use us in conversations to bring lost people closer to the heart of God. And there's nothing wrong. I believe in stadium salvation. I believe Billy Graham was used by God to bring millions of people to the Lord. I do believe in that. But I think we've almost disregarded, or we've kind of minimized the power of one-on-one, one person communicating and compassionately touching the life of another person who doesn't know Christ. And I preached that. The message he's talking about is the one we called ripples. And it's just one stone thrown into the pond. You can count the stone thrown into the pond, but you can't count the ripples that the stone produces. And there's something significant about an entire church valuing the soul of a human being and saying, I'm not just going to wait till Sunday to be spiritual. I'm actually seeing myself as one who does the work of an evangelist and shares the goodness of God with people. And if you can get your congregation, if the congregation can be activated with an evangelistic fervor and sort of a heart for, I don't want people to go to hell. I don't want people to live without God. I don't want people to, to not hear about the goodness of God in my own personal life. And I think we just need a good dose of courage, a good dose of boldness. And I think God will transform lives when we get passionate about telling people what God has done for them. I said it yesterday in Chattanooga's campus. I want to see the day happen when more people get saved outside the church than in the altar of the church. And then we baptize more people in water in our church than we ever knew got saved, because we didn't see them come down the altar. They didn't get saved in the altar. It'd be great if they did. But what if they got saved at the ballpark? What if they got saved on a job? What if they were, just at the restaurant, a conversation ensued that allowed us to have entrance into their heart, and they gave their heart to Christ. And we're seeing that happen. And yesterday, we just heard another story of it happening, of people sharing the gospel through testimony, what God had done in their life, and people seeing the transformation and coming to Christ as a result of their courage to talk about it.
So 20 years in, and let's just be brutally honest, if we may.
Sure.
When people look to plant churches nowadays, they don't look into impoverished areas.
No.
The church that you're actually where we're sitting right now, and demographically it's changed a lot.
Sure.
Chattanooga's done a lot of improvement to the city, but this was not the most attractive area. This was an area that had a lot of broken homes, had a lot of crime, a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
So how do you go into a community like this, build a church, and then say to the church, we're going to reach this community?
Yeah. Well, first of all, look, man, I think, you know how I feel about this. There's no way to say this without sounding, like a contrarian or an antagonist. And I'm not either of those things. I don't go around bashing the church, bashing its leaders for what's wrong with it. But I do think we have a problem when we do demographic studies to learn where to plant churches based on what area would most financially profit us.
Areas of affluence.
Right. Okay, areas of affluence. Who wants to go, what some would call the hood or the inner city? Who wants to do that? Well, Jesus would. Yes. That's where Jesus would go.
Right.
He would go to the places where people and humanity are most hurting, where there has been fatherlessness, where there has been crime, and where there has been an infestation of hopelessness, and all of that's where Jesus would set up his camp. And I don't get, a lot of people are running out of cities. They're running out of inner cities. They're running out of communities. I just preached in a tremendously large city. I won't call the name, but it was huge. The city is huge. And the place I went to preach, we drove through and passed all these places that were broken down and torn down. And there's just a sense of hopelessness. Well, how is it going to get turned around? We're going to have another, governmental program. That's not helping people, because you can treat the symptom, and the symptom is the crime, the murder, the theft, the robbery, the fighting, and all these issues, the gang-related problems that are going on. You can treat all of the symptoms, but until you deal with the issue that's causing it, it never changes. And the issue causing is not just a moral issue. It's not just a social issue. It's not just even a financial issue. It is a spiritual issue. The only one that can heal the broken heart is Jesus. The only one who can save the lost soul is Jesus. The only one that can give an addict his future back and give him his hope back is Christ. And I just think Christ invades darkness. I don't think we run from darkness and, that place over there, it's a great little place to build a family. Okay, we're wonderful. Raise your family there. But don't go try to do a demographic search to find the most affluent areas in a state where there's not a lot of churches. First of all, a lot of people are planting churches in those places. And for that reason, it's just another area of competition. You want to go somewhere where there's not much church competition? Find a place where the devil has set up his kingdom and say to God, send me there. And when you go there, it'll blow your mind what God would do if you go there for the people and for the sake of the glory of God. God will breathe on it. We bought this area, this location, in a time where people said to me, "What are you doing? Like, you're going downtown and there's crime and there's da 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 da." And I'm like, "What am I doing? I'm going where I feel like I'm going where Jesus would go." And, over these, 11 or 12 years now, we've just seen miracles, and we've seen the provision of God. Because when you get on God's page and you get within God's program, God will just breathe on it and he'll bless it. All this, let's do a demographic study. It makes me nauseous. I can't even help it. And when young sons come to me and they're like, "I want to go plant a church," I say, "Where?" First question, where is God calling you? "Well, he's calling me here." Well, that city is so churched. Are we sure that's where God's calling you to go? It could be, and I'm not saying it's not, but you're in your mid-20s, you got passion, zeal, fire, and you got the backing of other churches and leaders that want to help you get there. Go somewhere where, be the tip of the spear, piercing the darkness and running the enemy out of business. And that's what I really feel like, this whole thing was about for us. It wasn't like we did not make this decision for financial reasons. No one would have done that. We did this for one reason. Darkness only runs from the light, and we need to turn the light on in our city that we love so much, with the people in the city that we love so much. And what we're seeing is people who everyone thought was, forget them, they're hopeless. No, we're on the front end of a renaissance. And now 10 years, 11 years later, we're seeing it come to life in many, many ways, and we're very grateful to God for it.
And I think, what you just said, you kind of did the reverse of what most people did. You went from suburban, you went from an area of influence, a suburb of Chattanooga, into the inner city. Another thing that you said that I relate back to, obviously, we've talked about my brother who was at the Dream Center, the LA Dream Center. Yeah. And I distinctly remember one time when we were visiting out there, Matthew Barnett said that the Lord told him that if you'll take those that nobody wants, I'll give you those that everyone wants.
It's true.
And I think that's what you've modeled, because you've kind of gone the reverse order. You started in suburban and moved to the inner city. Tell us about Share. Tell us about what you do to reach the community.
Yeah. So, I think, and we taught this in our church, the ecclesia was not a Christian term. Jesus actually, when he called the church the ecclesia, which is the Greek term for the church in the Bible, ecclesia was, it actually had other connotations. It was actually used by other nations before that Jesus used it about the church. And it meant the called out ones, right? And they come together, and essentially in their gathering, there was three different purposes. Those aren't germane except one of them, which was affect the quality of life for the citizens. Civil referendum, some would call it. So when the ecclesia would come together, how can we make our city a better place for our constituents? And then Jesus calls us the ecclesia, the church. And I think sometimes we think about how do we make our church better for Christians rather than how can we make our city better for its constituents, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't make our church better for those who are believers within, but like my friend Fred Garman always says, a coin has two sides. In the kingdom of God, if the coin has to fall on, if your church is both maintenance and mission, so in the church, your church, my church, our church is like a coin. Whoever's listening, your church is like a coin. It has two sides. One side of the coin is mission. One side is maintenance. Maintenance is what you do for those who are already saved. Mission is what you do for those who are lost, right? If the coin has to fall on one side or the other, it has to fall on mission every time. We can never become a maintenance situation where we're just managing and maintaining a group of happy Christians on their way to heaven, but the church outside, the people outside the church are going to hell. Yeah. What is that? That is not the kingdom of God. So I started saying, what can we do in our community to make the quality of life better for our citizens? Now, obviously, we're a church of a couple thousand people. We can't necessarily do everything needed in a church in a city, 300,000 or 400,000 people. I mean, it takes a lot of churches working together. But I did say, what can we do? What is our responsibility to bring hope in our community, to bring what I call a redemptive lift in the community? How can we do that? And years ago, we just gutted this thing out in prayer called Share. Very simple. It's not novel. It's not, but it was, what can we do to demonstrate to people who don't and may never even come to our church? I don't know that a large percentage of the people we bless and help ever walk through the doors of our church, and we're okay with that.
That's right.
Because our agenda was not to grow our church. Our agenda was to demonstrate the goodness of God to a community that needed to see it. So we started giving food. We started giving clothing, which a lot of churches do, and we should do that. And we started sharing Christmas time, at Thanksgiving time. This past year, we gave tens of thousands of dollars. That's not an exaggeration. Actually, we gave over 100,000.
Over 100.
We gave over $100,000 away in Christmas time to our inner city families who just needed a lift. We don't want them to feel like, they got something wrong with them. The way we say it is, everybody gets to a place in life where you need a lift. You need help. And I want our church to be that place that just comes alongside sometimes those single parent mamas, single parent fathers, even grandkids who have taken kids. Mom and dad got put in jail. They got these. How are they going to take care of these people? How are they going to take care of their families? I wanted to come alongside and help them. And we started doing that. We did it on a small scale the first year. First year, I think we helped 40 kids. This past year, we helped over 2,000 children. Yeah. And even beyond that, this past year, it was 2022. We took up a $300,000 offering for our community. And we gave it away to 501c3s, nonprofits, people who were gutting it out. And I still get cards to this day from CEOs and from directors and leaders They were like, you didn't even know us. We didn't even know you knew we were on the radar. And you sent us, X amount of dollars for our vision to help kids with art camp. I mean, we help subsidize kids to go to art camp, but that's one of 100 different organizations that God enabled our church to help. I know people thought we were crazy to receive an offering that large and give it all away, but I want our city to know we are not just here waiting on you to come be a member of our church. Our church is here to bring a redemptive lift to our city. And when pastors start seeing their city as a place to bless rather than a place to take from, God will bless them with the influence to lead the people in their city. I believe that. In fact, it's in the Bible. King David became the leader of Israel, and the first thing he did on his agenda, other than get the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence of God, actually, the second thing he did was the Bible said he fed the nation. Mm-hmm. He fed the nation a meal. He sent them all home with just a little meal. And what happened as a result of that? They still talk about David to this day.
Yeah.
Because they knew he cared. They didn't care about what he knew. They knew how much he cared. And that's where share came from. We want you to know, whether you're ever a member of our church or not, we love you.
And to brag on God, and obviously this is not your heart, and it's not even the heart of the podcast to talk about how great our church is. That's not our goal. To brag on God, the 2,000 children were serviced, mm-hmm. and over 1,000 people were serviced with turkeys for Thanksgiving. And then the Lord spoke to you and said, take up $100,000 and give it away.
Yeah.
And then you just said the amount, because when you came to the church, and we're going somewhere with this, after doing Thanksgiving, mm-hmm. after doing Christmas, yep. you come at the first of the year and say, the Lord told me to give away $100,000. And again, you don't play the God card, mm-mm. but the Lord spoke to you. And how did we know the Lord had spoke to you? Because you asked for 100 and God gave you how much?
300,000.
Over 300,000 mm-hmm. after doing Christmas and Thanksgiving share.
Yep.
And that was distributed amongst 3 different counties. For 3 of our companies. Here's another thing. You talked a lot about serving the city, and some people would say that you don't get called to pastor a church, you're called to pastor a city.
I believe it.
I believe that you believe that too. Our friend Dino Rizzo has written a book called Serving Your City.
I love it.
The ARC model of what they're trying to accomplish. But when you approach something like that, how do another pastor would look at you right now and say, wait a minute, you asked them to take care of people at Thanksgiving, that's the end of November.
Right.
You asked me again to take care of people at Christmas. That's the end of December.
Right.
And then, by the way, you come at the end of January and hit me up again. How can you get buy-in from your congregation mm-hmm. to say, we're going to sow into the city at this level?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's one of those things I did scared. I mean, I'm just telling you, we had taken up a tremendous amount of resources, partners outside the church, partners within the church. Let's be real, Rich. You start talking about doing ministry on that scale, you got to know God is sending partners from different streams and different, and I think for whoever's listening to this, whatever pastor, you worry about the vision. That only comes through prayer, laying on your face, pleading with God, praying and processing and purifying your heart from motives that are not godly. You just get down to real desperation to want to do something that brings hope and life, and you want God to get the glory for it, and then God starts birthing things on the inside. You worry about the vision, let God worry about the provision. This is the absolute greatest challenge of my life over 20 years, is catching a vision from God, knowing it was bigger than anything I could make happen, and yet having the faith to say, we're gonna cast this vision and see what happens. And you know as well as I do, when we cast a vision to raise $100,000 to bless ministries and nonprofits and 501c3s and people that were in the community doing the work, schools, we blessed every school in our region and in our area. We helped them all, as we did in Cleveland, as we did in Athens.
Right.
And we did that because, again, we want them to know, we don't want your...
As we did in Bulgaria and as we did in Uruguay.
And Uruguay.
And Guatemala.
100%. And so my point is, I need to worry about the vision. What is God saying to me? What is he wanting to do for my city? I can't handle the provision part because that has to be God. And if we get out there beyond ourselves, our friend Sam Chan says, if you wait till you know everything about it, then you probably waited too late. If you wait till you got total peace and you got all of it figured out, you probably missed your opportunity. Yeah. We did it afraid. We raised a tremendous amount of resources for the kids. And then in January, you want to raise $100,000 for the community? Let's just see what happens. And our people it blew our minds. It still blowing my mind what that meant for people in our community who were not expecting it at all from a church. They were expecting a government handout.
Right.
But the church came through. And my point in all that is, I told the Lord, your kingdom's the kingdom. Like it is the place on the planet where people ought to find hope, joy, peace, and even resource. And I want us to be able to do that. And, it made me wonder, should next year we, and I'm not going to, because you don't just assume, but it'd be awesome to set a goal of $250,000 to give away to ministries and to give away to churches that needed it, schools that needed it, and raise $500,000 for the glory of God. What if God did that? So I don't know. I think I need to stay focused on the vision that God's giving and trust God with the provision.
You know what's really cool, and I travel and know a lot of people in my circle, and oftentimes when we talk stories like this, because this is a big story, you've been very public about a donor paying off the debt of the previous campus and donors that have paid off debt at the Chattanooga campus. And, early on, especially when I started working with you, well, that's Kevin Wallace. Mm-hmm. Well, that's Kevin Wallace. Well, I don't have what Kevin Wallace has. And I think what I would like to encourage the watchers and listeners of this podcast is, there was a time when Kevin Wallace had 30 people at Mountain Meadows Church of God.
Jesus.
And when people say that to me, I'm like, yeah, but you don't know the faith that the person had to have to believe God for something that big.
Yeah.
And I look back at your history as a pastor. I've always admired what you've done. Haven't always worked for you or with you, but in this moment of watching and getting to know you, how do you balance faith versus finances? Common sense reality versus I have faith for this, but I believe God can do this. We know God can do anything.
Right.
That doesn't mean he always will.
Right.
So what is his will and what we're asking him to do versus, again, playing that I've heard from God card?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. I go back to the moment in time in my office when we had about 100 people maybe. I was under my desk praying, getting ready to go out and preach on a Sunday. God said to me, I knew it was the whisper of the Spirit. It wasn't like God, when I say God said to me, it wasn't like, just loud. It was a whisper. It was this voice from God who asked me a question that I could have never asked myself. God said, what would you do if lack were not your problem? And I was like, man, how do you answer God when he says that, And I was like, well, I would do this. And he said, then go do it, because lack is not your problem. And I was like, that is such a cool God thing, right? But then I got scared to death. Build an orphanage and, touch the nations. And at that time we had 100 people. And I'm like, and what God was trying to get me to see and wanted me to hear his heart on it was, most of the time we struggle in leading ministry because I think we do things that are manageable to us. They don't require faith. Or we get out ahead of it and we get a motive to do something that outdoes everyone else. Neither of those please the Lord. A motive of you getting any kind of glory is something that God will not breathe on. You can't handle the glory. There's only one person that can get the glory and handle it. That's why we give it to him. It's God. I had to crucify a lot of things in my journey. I had to put a lot of dreams that were good ideas but not God on the altar. I had to pick up a lot of stuff that I knew I couldn't make happen. Only God can make it happen. So the balance between faith and finances is this. When you get something from God and you know it's from God, it will do two things to you. It will remind you you can't do it on your own. And in that, you need to take comfort that when God does it and God says it, he'll give you the faith for it, but he's the only one that can make it happen. There's another thing that happens, I believe, when you get a real vision from God. It begins to simplify and help you reduce all of the collateral ideas that are not from God. I knew when God told me to come. When I was 17 years old, I had a dream about leading a church in inner city Chattanooga. We've already talked about why would you come to inner city Chattanooga. What I didn't tell you, when I was 17 years old, I was in a jungle in a dream, cutting down the thickest, nastiest, densest jungle. All of these vines and all of these leaves, and a snake drops down in the dream, and we have a confrontation. I never in my life will forget that dream. And when I woke up, my mom said I just didn't move for hours. I stayed in my bed where I had the dream. It was a week before I went to college. And the Lord said to me in my spirit, you will pastor a church in inner city Chattanooga. And I knew as a 17-year-old boy, I told my daddy on my way to college, one day I'll pastor a church in inner city Chattanooga. Had no clue it'd be the old Highland Park Baptist Church. I didn't know all those details. I just knew what he showed me. And when this church came open, someone came to me and said, it's for sale. I said, you're kidding. They said, you need to go buy it. And I said, I don't need to go do anything unless it's God's will. Well, I went on a 3-day fast. You know the story. I've told the story 100 times about God speaking to me in the Atlanta airport. Doors are closing and will not reopen.
On the train
at the Atlanta airport. Yeah. And the Lord said to me, this door in Chattanooga will close, and you'll never have this opportunity again to buy this church, and I want you to buy it now. I don't have the money, God. God said, I didn't ask you if you had the money. I want you to go tell the real estate agent, you want the building. And I'm like, okay, so we got to pay for this somehow. And the person who called me and asked me if I knew it was even open calls me back and says, you hear from God? I said, I heard from God. He told me to buy it, but I don't have any resources. He said, that's because you're not supposed to buy it. I am. And through a series of miracles, your yes triggers and releases everything you need to accomplish what you said yes to. Everything you need to accomplish what you said yes to God about, it releases the provision to accommodate it.
Let's do this. I think it's incredibly critical that, again, they need to understand that you didn't always have a church of 2,000 in 6 locations or whatever we got, and more on the way. They need to understand that there was a time when you were 21 that you had 30 people, okay? They need to understand
Losing my mind.
This is a highlight reel. Everybody sees the Kevin Wallace highlight reel, right? Everybody sees he had the big donor that paid off the church. Oh, he had the big donor that helped him get the Highland Park Baptist Church. Oh, he had the help to launch a campus in Athens, Tennessee, and that just dropped in his lap. None of that is actual. All of this is a God-ordained, orchestrated steps. But here's what I would like for you to think about. Help us understand that life in ministry for Kevin Wallace has not always been a highlight reel. No. It's, in the 4 years we've been here, we've shed some tears. Sure. We've taken some losses. Sure. What is an example, or maybe a series of things, or things that you can say, guys, I failed. Mm-hmm. I had a great idea. I thought it was a great idea. It wasn't a God idea. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you thought were surefire successes, things that you look back on and you can say, I'm not that. I did this and this didn't work and this didn't. Our friend Francis Chan recently shared all the different things that we thought about, highlight reels of what's taking place in that ministry, and he had failure after failure that no one ever thinks about. But on a real level, there are times when Kevin Wallace, as a pastor, as a bishop, as a church leader, as a denominational leader, what are some things that you look back on and thought, man, I was sure that was going to work, but that just didn't work?
Wow. A lot of the pain of my journey has been people pain. There were times I thought people would work out. I've done a lot of self-evaluating over my 20-year journey. What did I do to make them do that? Did I do something to trigger a season of stupid that came on them? Did I do something that triggered a season of or an action of betrayal that was? What did I do? And some of it I did. Some of it I probably ignored things and didn't act quick enough. There were other times, the Lord just had to help me understand, if it happened to Jesus, it's going to happen to you. There were other times where I would make a program decision. We're going to try this and do this. We're going to invest here, and total flop, total waste of time. When Jesus rises from the dead, he goes into the room of the disciples. The first thing he shows them is not the trophies. He shows them the scars. They see, Thomas said, unless I see his hands and his feet, I won't believe. And so Jesus replays the entire scenario that Thomas missed. Thomas is there at the second time Jesus comes into the room. Jesus comes in, he shows him the scars in his hands and feet. And he says to Thomas, you've seen and you believe. Blessed are those who don't see and believe. But the point is, he doesn't show them the trophies. He shows them the scars. I think everybody, whoever's listening, I don't care if it's me, Richie Hughes, Mike Todd, T.D. Jakes, call the name. We all see the highlight reels. We covet the highlight reels. We hunger for the success that made those people's name a household name. But if you knew the hell those people went through to become a household name, you wouldn't want to become a household name. You would not want the warfare that was associated. Yes, Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands, and David took a rock and slayed the giant. That's our king. But you weren't there when David almost died at the paws of a lion and the paws of a bear. Like, we read those things and we think, oh, that was so simple. David fought. He slew. He had to he was in a fight for his life. We talk about all the people and the resources in the campuses and the donors that helped. The first 6 months of the ministry, I almost literally had a verifiable nervous breakdown. Literally thought I was losing my mind. My wife was sick in the hospital. My son was sick in the hospital. My 1-year-old, my newborn had spinal meningitis. My 1-year-old had kidney stones. Crazy stuff. Nobody knows those stories except the 30 people that were there carrying that with me. And Alma Kelly and B.L. Kelly, who looked at me and said, you can't stop. I was only 6 months in. I'm going to them telling them I'm going to quit. I'm not called to this. I can't do this. If this is what ministry is, I don't know how I'm going to survive because my wife is suffering. My babies are suffering. And B.L. Kelly would look at me and say, the devil is so nervous. He's so nervous. I'm like, nervous? I'm losing my mind. I don't care what the devil is. He just said, keep doing it. And you just keep doing it. You keep gutting it out. You keep wrestling bears and lions, and then Goliath show up, and you just keep doing what worked there, and you let it go by faith, and God does it. So don't believe the highlight reel was an easy place to get to. I don't care who we're talking about. Even an athlete, even a Hollywood movie star, everyone has a story that you haven't read about that got them to the place where you now know about them.
Yeah.
And if you knew the journey to get to that place, you might not have taken it.
I don't think I would. I know some of the journeys, and I know some of the guys that have taken the path that they have to get to where they are in whatever profession or pastoral position that they're in. And when I look at the scars that they have, I'm not sure that I would put myself through that or my family through it to achieve the level of success that they have. And again, I always sees that highlight reel. Mm-hmm. Tell us this. What is one surprise? What is something that you never saw coming that all of a sudden it just worked and it clicked and all of a sudden something was birthed and something took off that maybe somebody even brought you an idea and you thought, what in the world is that? Okay, well, I'll go along with you, for this moment. And then all of a sudden it was, wow, what a surprise from God.
So we have talked a lot about that story when God provided miraculously. What very few people know is I didn't know how we were going to do that. Like it was the worst economy in the history of the nation. Mm-hmm. Some would argue. We go to borrow $2 million to build a new sanctuary. The church was exploding. Worst economy in the history of the nation. The church is exploding. We're having church in a gymnasium with brown backdrop and brown. Oh my God. And it was a disaster on one hand. Like we broke all the rules for church growth. And we got to build a building in the worst economy, and I go to 5 banks, and we're doing well, and God's blessing. I go to 5 banks, and they look at me and say, we can't lend you any money. Okay, well, great. I ain't trying to build Taj Mahal. I'm just trying to build a bigger building, right? finally the sixth guy, this was a surprise for a 31-year-old, 32-year-old pastor. We've been shut down and told, no, you can't borrow. And a Baptist deacon from First Baptist of Cleveland looks at me. Richard Burnett looks at me. Yes. He walks in my office,
great guy.
And he says to me, I feel God in this place. Wow. And I said, you do? I feel God too. I mean, I'm going to do something right now. I feel God. A deacon feels God. A Baptist deacon, praise God, feels God. And God moved. And we got in. Watch this. While we're building that building, God says, build an orphanage in Guatemala. Build a church planting institute. Now, this is one of those places, you and I weren't together then. I often think about, how would we have done that? Like me come into the office and tell you and the CFO, Ryan here, we're going to build a bigger building, and we're going to build a $500,000 orphanage and a $280,000 church planting institute in the nation of Uruguay. And we're going to renovate the 4th Avenue campus in downtown Chattanooga.
Ready, the cons list would have looked like this.
Ready, set, hi. Let's run the play.
The
right?
pros, con.
Yeah, the pros this.
This
the
would have
cons
been, you
this.
better play the God card.
No, 100%. And I knew God was saying it.
Yeah.
And it was so much so we had spent about $10,000 on this campaign called Imagine. Imagine. And man, it was real cool, but it wasn't God. There was no breath on it at all. And I was in prayer one day and God said, I didn't tell you to call this Imagine. I said, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm wasting money. And the Lord said, just believe. That's what I heard the Lord say. Just do what I told you to do and believe. So I shut down Imagine overnight. I shut it down. Everybody's like, what are we doing? I said, just trust me. God said, just believe. So we started a Believe campaign. Believe. Believe. And we were not going to put any more money in it because I didn't felt like I wasted money. All I want you to do, church, is believe. And we started believing. And we did all those projects at the same time. And the month before we paid our first principal and interest payment on the new building we had built, because God had helped us, is when I got the call. That call shocked me because I knew if I hadn't heard God, they're going to run me out of this town. Yeah. This is not going to end well for the Wallace bunch. But God, again, came through, and his faithfulness shocked me. It's why now when he says do something big, I get sweaty palms, I get a little nervous, but I'm like, look, you've been good.
Yeah.
You've been faithful. Yeah. I don't know how you're going to do this one, but you're going to do something. And again, we don't get out there ahead of God, but we don't want to miss it. And I'll never operate in a level of, well, when you show me, that's when I'll do it. I always say, God, if I know it's you, we'll do it. And however you're going to make it happen, that's good. So that shocked me. You don't know this story. Very few people know this story. The night I announced that gift that was given to our church, some leaders in our church had set up a meeting with me. I don't think I've ever told this story. I can't believe I'm telling this on this podcast. But some leaders in my church, I was a young man. That would have been 2011, so that would have been 8 years in. I was 29, 30 years old still. Church was exploding. Church was growing. God was good. We had just gotten a $4.2 million gift. And I didn't know why 2 leaders in the church wanted to meet with me that night before I announced to 60 leaders what God had done. And I get in my office, and these 2 men that I love dearly looked at me and said, we think we need new leadership. And I said, well, is this a joke? In my mind, I'm saying, listen to this. And they said, well, you brought us to this place, but I don't know that you can take us where we're going. I'm 29 years old. I'm getting ready to drop a bomb on everybody that we are debt-free and got money in the bank, and all of our projects are paid off. The orphanage, the church planting institute, the renovation downtown at the old 4th Avenue campus. I'm getting ready to tell everybody God has paid the bills. And I got 2 men who look at me and say, we don't think you can take us where we're going. Now, that was a shock. That was a bad shock, right? But integrity allowed me to look at those 2 men who didn't think I had what it took to take the church to the next level, and probably didn't, just to be quite honest, at that point in my life. And even at this, it's just a God thing, right? I could have bit their head off because I had information they didn't know about.
You had a check in your pocket.
I had a check in my pocket. The money was in the bank. You hear what I'm telling you?
It was wired.
It was in the bank. The money was sitting in the bank. And I could have bit their head off.
Right.
And I could have said, there's a door, both of you. And I didn't. I did lean back in my chair like a boss. I leaned back in my chair. I said, brothers, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't. I'm going to let you stay on this truck for this journey because I want you to see what God's about to do. But you're off tonight. And I'm not going, and to this day, no one's ever known who that is. I would never tell that. But let me say this. How you can deal with people who are your adversaries in a season determines what kind of future God can trust you to lead. Because if you got some place in your heart of resentment and always trying to get back at somebody that tried to hurt you, you're not qualified to live in that kind of measure of blessing. I'm not saying you have to open the door for everybody, but those men just had really off season, an off day, and they missed it. And I wasn't going to hang them out to dry over that. We'd been together for years. They just missed it. And I think the shock of that moment for them, when I took them out of that office, put them in that room with all those other leaders and told them what God had done for us, I mean, they were tears in their eyes. They were broken.
Yeah.
They were broken. And I'm glad to this day that I loved them even when they didn't feel like I was the one that was. You just treat your enemies well. Treat your enemies well. Love them, because God will honor your life if you handle those moments of blessing like that. So the shock, there have been far more many shocks for the good than I'm able to sit here and remember, because I could think so many things I deserved to break down and not work. And all the times that God let them work was unbelievable.
You know, you share that story, and it's such an amazing story, but I've watched you extend grace when many others wouldn't have. I've come to you before and said, let me handle this for you.
Yeah.
Let me be Peter for just a minute and cut Malchus's ear off. Let me take care of this for you. And I'll never forget, early on, I think it was my first year here with you 4 years ago, when I was sharing with Chris Horvath, who was your assistant at that time,
right,
who's now our campus pastor in Cleveland.
Right.
And he said, I can tell you what he's going to tell you when you tell him this, because I was saying, Chris, this is what I'm going to tell him. Here's how I want to handle it. And I need to cut Malchus's ear off, right? And he said, I can tell you what he's going to tell you. I said, what's he going to say? He said, be careful, because the grace that you see me extending to that person, you may need yourself one day.
Yep.
And I'll never forget that. And to err on the side of grace is what Jesus would do.
If I'm going to err handling any situation, even people who've hurt me, and there've been, you know this, I'm not whining, but in leadership, leaders are going to get maligned. They're going to be betrayed. They're going to be lied on. They're going to be hurt by people that they let close to them. If I'm going to be like Jesus, I'm not just going to love people who are for me. I'm going to have to love people who actually had ill intent in their heart. And if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of mercy, because what I sow in the field of mercy is what I'll reap in that same field. And you know, there's limits, not to mercy, but there's limits to what you allow people the access to be able to do to you. So I want to be very clear. There is a line, and we eventually got to that line with that individual. But here's what I can lay my head down at night and say: I did everything that I could to extend mercy and grace and opportunity for whatever. And I have peace with that. When I need mercy from God, I can always draw on the fact, Lord, I've tried to be a merciful man. And, you know, that ain't always easy, because I've had to take some bullets as a leader to protect people that were actually not willing or in any way interested in protecting me. I know stuff about people, and leaders watching this know stuff about people that they've had to transition, let go of. Had you told everything you knew about that person would be able to get a job anywhere in the kingdom of God. There's things I know about people that I will never tell. I'll go to my grave believing those things. Why? Because as with mercy, it didn't hurt anybody. It wasn't like, you know, physical abuse or anything like that. Just some things that in that particular chemistry of that person that could have kept them from really going forward in life. And I just decided I'm not going to bury people like that. I'm not going to use what I know to hurt people. I'm going to be I want to be merciful, because I need mercy. And so, yeah, there have been people on our team since you got here. Pastor, bring the hatchet. I'm like, we will in time, but it ain't time yet. And sometimes that's hurt me, and I should have done it a little quicker. But I never regretted being merciful.
I've watched you take the bullet yourself a lot, but I've watched you adamantly defend when it's attack against the church.
100%.
You are very good at delineating. If it's a personal attack at Kevin Wallace, you kind of let it roll off your back.
Right.
But don't mess with the church. And I've also watched you say, don't mess with my wife.
Don't mess with my family.
Don't mess with my kids.
No, you cross lines when you start calling, you start saying things. That's just me personally. Now, you may be watching this, that, your family's part of the ministry. They can take it. No, that ain't for you to decide. I will decide if I'm going to put up with your foolishness regarding what you're saying about my family and my church. And I think Paul was an incredibly engaged defender of the church. You have to be. Now, Paul took a lot on the chin, right? Paul took a lot of it on his chin personally about what they said about him not being an apostle. And they said he wasn't holy enough. And they said he wasn't, anointed enough. And the whole thing, we say things like, you shouldn't defend yourself. Y'all have heard this before. You've heard this before. Don't defend yourself. You don't have to. Read the book of Corinthians. The book of Corinthians, the second book of Corinthians, is an entire defense of the apostolic ministry of Paul. It is not completely truthful that you don't at times need to defend yourself. What you don't need to do is get in arguments with people that don't matter.
Yeah.
Some of these people they say
with
stuff.
subjects that don't matter.
With subjects that don't matter. Some of these people are irrelevant. And if they're irrelevant, don't make them relevant by addressing what they said that was irrelevant, right? Paul was in an argument with other quote unquote super apostles, and he was trying to tell his people, I birthed you into the kingdom of God through my preaching and ministry. And now you're following this cat, and you got to defend yourself in some of those things. But the reality of it is, personally, I have to take a lot on the chin. And anybody in the seat of executive leadership has to. But when you start crossing the line of, putting your mouth on my family or putting your mouth on the church, I feel a responsibility, not to create unnecessary drama, but just to address it and to say, no, that's a lie. You're acting in foolishness. And I think sometimes we pastors think the noble thing to do is just not say anything at all.
Yeah.
And in my responses, I want to be holy and I want to be pure of heart, but I want them to know you're not going to do that. You're not getting away with it. You can get away with saying stuff about me and I let them.
Right.
But you're not going to get away with, saying stuff about the church that is untrue. And then you put your mouth on, a man's wife or his children. I will raise you 10 and give you 20.
Another episode of Breath and Bones. Is that it?
Breath and Bones.
Breath and Bones.
Breath and Bones. That's so good.